Hi, everybody. We're going to take a couple of minutes to talk about Microsoft's uh, external or access or remote access to on-premise applications. Now, everybody's familiar with VPNs. Yes, VPN is great. You can connect to the network. You get an IP address on the network. It's an inbound connection. And then once you're on the network, you have access to whatever is on the network. But that's a problem, actually, because we don't want to give everybody access to anything on the network. I mean, we can certainly use some firewall rules on servers, some access rules in different applications or protocols or file server, things like that. But it would be much nicer if we could make this more robust, more secure, more specific, and maybe even add in eliminating the inbound route from users, so we could eliminate to a good deal the attack surface. So, how can we do that? Well, there's a lot of companies out there now, and we've all heard of them that are promoting products called SSE, Secure Server Edge. Sounds cool. Or ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access. And these are all ways to kind of replace a VPN, although some of them actually use VPN to accomplish this task. Microsoft has traditionally had a method for this. It was limited, though. The method was called Entra ID Application Proxy. Again, I'm trying to use Entra ID now as the name for the formerly named Azure Active Directory. I like Entra ID a lot more. I don't like it when Microsoft changes names, but this one should have been called something like Entra ID from the beginning. Entra ID, the authentication service for Microsoft 365, was never really part of Azure. They just borrowed the name from that. And it never had anything to do with Active Directory. It didn't work the same way, didn't use the same protocols or anything like that. They just named it that. So both parts of the old name didn't really make any sense. So Entra ID, I'm all on board with that. So the application proxy was a great way to allow external users access to web-based apps on your network, and it was really web-based. It could be a remote desktop services if the front end was remote apps, but it was basically web-based. And the way that worked is we had a Entra ID application service in the cloud that users would connect to and go through, and we could create conditional access policies for those. And then on premise, we had an application proxy connector. That server was on our network. Didn't have to be in a DMZ, but it was somewhere on the network. Preferably, it belonged to our domain. It made the connection or proxied the connection to the applications. And actually, that connector was actually the initiator for both the connection to the application, of course it was, but also it was the initiator for the connection to the cloud, to the user. There was no inbound initiation of traffic. So the connector knew about all the applications on premise. It knew also about the Entra ID application in the cloud. And so it provided outbound connection to the cloud, web-based, initiated application connection to the cloud, and also to the application server. So when the user would use the service, they would go through the application proxy service. The application proxy service would actually tell the on-premise connector, hey, I got a user here that wants to connect to this on-premise app, and then the connection would happen that way. But the connection outbound was always open. It was all the connectors, on-premise servers were always talking to the proxy service in the cloud. So there was no direct inbound connection. You couldn't really probe it, for example. So that's been available for a while, and it's a bit of a pain to set it up. Yeah, you can download the connector, install it, get it all talking to the cloud in a few minutes, but there's a few extra things that you have to do when just using that service. On premise, you actually had to give those connector servers permission to imitate users when the connection was made to the service, and the web server, whatever it was, and that imitation is called Kerberos constrained delegation. We were delegating the ability of the proxy server to act on behalf of the user when connecting to a back-end service. That was a little bit of weird because we also a lot of times would have to create a service principal name for the web server so that we could tell the proxy server what it was connecting to, and we'd do this in the proxy service connections. I'll show you that in an example in a second. We had to do that. We also would, in the Entra ID in the cloud, we'd make enterprise applications. Everybody's familiar with those enterprise applications, usually OAuth applications from third party that want access to things. But App Proxy also used enterprise applications. We use enterprise applications, and we tell those enterprise applications, let's say Web Server 1 or Web App 1. We'd tell them the internal address of the web server, and we'd also tell it the external address. We didn't really tell it the external address. It was always some form of the app proxy URL that I'll also show you. So we had to create one of those. And once we got all that working the right way, bing, bang, boom, we got connected on premise. So you can see here in the background, I'll make my little picture smaller. I'm in the enterprise application section of a dev tenant, and you can see I'm in the application proxy node for enterprise applications. This is where you kind of start things. You come in here and you download connectors onto servers, and you install the app proxy. That's another a little bit of a walkthrough. If you follow Microsoft's directions for this, it's pretty straightforward. You have to have a certain level of .NET on it. You have to enable a TLS, disable an HTTP2. There's some weird things you have to do, but it doesn't take too long. It's basically a couple of registry settings. And then you install this service. Now, I've created something called a connector group. I've created a connector group because we want to have connector groups. We want to have at least two connectors. What if one of them fails or we have to take it down for maintenance? We'd like the other one to take over. So we'll always create two servers, put them in a connector group. And the reason you have connector groups is you might have one connector group for North America, one for a different area. You could even have connector groups for different applications that have different security settings, things like that. But normally, we'll just have one probably in a normal company. So I have one connector group. I have two connectors here that you can see. Now, the other thing here, you see disable application proxy up here on the top. That's because it's enabled right now. And it's enabled because I enabled it. Now, sometimes the second you install a connector, it'll enable it. Sometimes it won't. So you got to look up here. Make sure it says disable so you know it's not enabled. If it says enable it, then go ahead and click on that to make sure the service is enabled. Now, I have a on-premise environment that I'll show you here. I have a little remote desktop. This is an on-premise environment. You're looking at a domain controller here called DC1. There's a couple of other servers on my network, one called App Proxy 1. The other App Proxy server is in here as well. I just didn't move it into this OU, but just pretend it's here. There's also a web server here. Web server is my web server. Now the web server is set up for integrated authentication. I've disabled the anonymous authentication. Yeah, that's something you'll normally do. We want to do integrated authentication so it can attempt to do a Kerberos authentication, or it'll allow Kerberos authentication so it can verify users' tickets and give them a service ticket through a domain controller, or accept the service ticket from a domain controller. So I'm gonna I'll just double click on this. I'm gonna click on the delegation tab, and you notice there's nothing here. The reason you click on a delegation is when you want a server to be able to delegate, you want to give a server the ability to act on behalf of a user. So I show this because your web server is not where you set up delegation. The other server, the app proxy server, is where you set up the delegation. So you got to do something like this. You can see HTTP, that would be http/web server, web server dot whatever my domain name is. This is a service principal name. You may have to create one of those with PowerShell or a command line. We'll leave that to another time. But you notice trust this computer for delegation to specific services. You want to use this format here. I've tried the other formats and don't really work. This is the format you want, and this will be able to talk through a Kerberos delegation to this service in my web server. All right, so that's pretty much set up on premise. So in the cloud, I have to actually type in a configuration for this web server, because how are people going to get to it? How would they know? How they're going to know is they're going to go to an enterprise application. They'll double click on that, or we'll give them a shortcut or whatever in My Apps, and that will start the process. So let me go back to my enterprise applications here. I'm going to click on all applications. Yeah, I got the usual stuff. And I have a couple of apps here. Looks like I may have deleted my apps, but I would have an app here that was set up to use a web proxy, and I would have an internal and external. I'll actually create one from scratch just to kind of show you this. Here's add an on-premise application. This is one of the ways you can do it. You could also go into the app proxy section here that you saw a minute ago where my connectors were, and you could start from there. But here's what you do. The name of it, this is how it's going to appear in My Apps. This is what users are going to double click on. The internal URL. Well, this is the URL of the application as it exists on-premise. This is what the proxy connector on-premise is going to connect to. So whatever that is, HTTP, HTTPS, let's pretend here that it's an S. That's app one. So this would be a web server on my network and a virtual application called app one. Now you notice the external URL pretty much been put there for me, and it'll all end with app one. You can kind of see it down here at the bottom. If I highlight this, I guess it didn't do too much good, but you can see this is the general way it's going to go. It's going to give you your tenant name, .ms@proxy.net, and then / whatever you put in for the virtual directory. So that gets done for you. Pre-authentication, you always want to have Entra ID. This allows you to authenticate up in the cloud, so you can use conditional access policies. Yeah, you could do a different one, but I recommend stick with this if you can, the connector group that you want to use. I'm going to use this connector group. I called it private access because I'm going to talk about private access in a second. All right, this is how I create one. I'm going to kind of leave this one without finishing it up, but then it would show up in the app gallery, and then users would double click on it, and boom, they get into it. All right, so that's one way to do things. I'm going to discard all of that, go back to enterprise applications, and let's talk about something newer. So that works fine. You'd have to have all the applications as enterprise apps. People double click on them. The connector brings them to the application. We don't have to use a VPN. There's no inbound connection. The user just goes to the app proxy service, which is waiting for the users to initiate a connection to it. But the users don't initiate the connection on premise. Again, that's always open outbound. So the users just take advantage of that existing HTTPS connection to connect to the application on premise. And it works great. And again, since it's an enterprise app, we can use conditional access, we can use authentication strings, we can, whatever we want, just like any other app that we have in Entra ID. The problem with this is we don't get easy access to connect to, let's say file servers. At SMB, you can't do that, right? We all actually know that already. RDP, just straight up RDP or whatever, FTP. You can't do that with this. It's got to be web-based. So Microsoft saw all these other companies offering an alternate to the VPN and also traffic out to the internet. We'll talk about that in another section. And they were all calling it like the names I used before, ZTNA and SSE, and they were like, boy, we got to get in on that market because we're losing some market share to these companies. So they did. For the last couple of years, they've been working on something called global access. Global access has two parts. Internet access, that's outbound to cloud, Office 365 right now, and soon, other apps, but for Microsoft, it's Office 365 only. And inbound, which is what I'm going to talk about. They call that private access. Private access works a lot like the app proxy. In fact, users could still use My Apps to get to different apps, but it's actually a little bit easier. The setup's easier. Now, one thing I will tell you, it is early December, mid-December 2023. This product is in preview, public preview. So yeah, that means it can change. It means licensing you might get charged for licensing. I'm not quite sure where that's going to end up right now. To try the preview, all you have to have is Microsoft 365 license, really an Azure ADP 1 license is all you really need. I don't know where that's going to come down. There's talk that it's just going to require the old Microsoft 365 E3 or Microsoft 365 E5 and you'll get it. So, and then maybe there'll be some add-ons after that. We're a little unclear on that, but for right now, you don't need much. So, how does that work and what are the advantages? Well, the advantages we'll talk about first. The advantages are the users are, we don't have to rely on web anymore. It can be any protocol. Ding, ding, ding. So SMB file shares, RDP, whatever you want, you can use it. That's great. Second of all, the setup is, I found, a lot easier. Kerberos delegation is not needed. I didn't set it up for a bunch of my servers. In fact, I got rid of it as a test for that one server. Everything still worked. I connected to RDP, connected to a file share using SMB, connected to a web server without the delegation being in place. I actually got rid of that for a while, and it all just worked. So that's a huge advantage. Now we can just put whatever we want in there. How do they connect to it? Well, they don't even have to go to My Apps to get to this. Actually, we capture traffic on the client machine. So if a user typed in, let's say RDP server dot whatever their domain name was, if they tried to connect to that using RDP, their machine, their client, would capture that and send it through the private access. That's great. So to the user, they don't really even have to do anything different. It's capturing or acquiring this traffic. So what do we have to do to set this up? Well, initially, you have to set up the app proxy. Yep. It works as an extension to that, which is actually good. That's a tried and true. It's a known technology. Microsoft has used it for a while. They just added on to it. They added on to the connector. They added on to the service. So it's a little bit different setting it up, but the first thing you have to do is you have to set up the app proxy connectors. The same connectors you just saw a minute ago, we got to set those up for this private access. Sorry about that. So if I go to my application proxy, I still need to have these two in there. Okay. Now I can make a connector called private access, which I have. I like to do that just so I know. Here's what we're going to do. Aha. just so I know that it's going through those, and I could actually use App Proxy if I still wanted to for other things. Although once I get this private access working, I'm probably going to stick with that because it's really a lot easier to set up. Now, the other great thing about this is there's a way to set it up for as a default for all of your inbound servers. You don't have to pick and choose which ones. You have to add those in, but users don't have to pick them. And you can just say, well, I've set up these servers, these ports, which is all you have to do. You can call them by their server name on-premise or their IP address if you want on-prem, and the port number that you're using, 3389 for RDP, or 443, 80, 445. SMB, so whatever you really want. So you set that up down in a different part. We got to have this set up first of all. So I'm going to collapse that. In fact, I'm going to collapse up identity. I'll look a little bit further down, and I see global secure access. And I see something called quick access. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the setup involved, but it's actually fairly quick. I need to set up this quick access thing. Quick access is a way to bundle a lot of on-premise servers into one grouping, and then I can put rules on that. So whatever my conditional access policy I want, my authentication strengths, I can do that and apply it to all of these servers. If I want different applications to have different conditional access, for instance, different authentications, I can also do that. There's a way to add those in separately. But if you don't have need for that, you can just put them all in the same bundle. And here I've done that. You can see I have a domain controller here, RDP server, a web server, domain controller here, DC. That's actually that's the RDP one. This RDP server, for whatever reason, that's the SMB one. It's a little mixed up, but it works, I promise. And I couldn't connect to, this DC1 for a file server because that's not the port. I could do that. I could add the port in, just type in ports with a comma in them, and you can connect to anything you want. The users, if they use these names, it will the client will capture that traffic, acquire it, and send it right through the app proxy. Now, I keep saying client. What do I mean by that? Well, I don't mean the Windows operating system. I mean the global secure access client. Yep, it's a client that you must install. It's a MSI or an EXE installer, so you can put it out in Intune if you want as a Win32 app. Microsoft will probably start shipping the future versions of Windows with this client already. So that's good, but you can install it like anything else. And that's really where the functionality comes in. You have to have a functionality on the client and a functionality on the server, and just like any application. So the client must be installed on Windows. There's a few other caveats. The machines have to be joined, Azure AD joined or hybrid joined. So there's some other caveats there. So you can't just use it for anything. But once all those requirements are met, it's pretty seamless. All right, so down here, I'll give you a couple other things. Enterprise applications, that's for applications that I want to treat differently that I just mentioned a while ago. If I want to have different conditional access for them, I can do those individually. Down here under Connect, I have client download. That's how you get the client, right? And you notice there's Android, iOS, Mac as well. So that's cool. We can do all of those as well. And then I have something called traffic forwarding. Traffic forwarding is where I turn on the inbound service, private access, or the outbound service, which is the internet access. I'm just using private access, so I've turned that on here. I can assign it to different groups. Right now, that's a little still in preview. I think you're forced to assign it to every device, but you'll be able to pick and choose who gets that access in the future. All right, and that's pretty much it, really. Now, and again, I don't have to do constrained delegation. Now, if a user types in one of those names, RDPs into one of the server, or does a / to the file server, the client will acquire that traffic, send it right out through the app proxy. It'll come into the on-premise environment through the app proxy connectors and straight to the server that you've identified. It really works fantastic, and I'm very impressed by it. realize, however, if you're going to do this, I notice there's quite a bit of delay, sometimes 10, 15 minutes or more if you change a policy in the cloud before the client becomes aware of that. Even if you reboot the client, I haven't really found a way around that. Not a big deal. And they'll probably speed that up in the future. So that's about it. I just wanted to give you a quick preview of what I've been working on. So this is a great leap forward. I wouldn't worry too much about the preview label that's been put on this. Yeah, preview's not the greatest. You don't get, you're not going to get weekend support or anything like that. And they might change things. Heck, they could even get rid of it, but they're not going to. This is a strategic a product for Microsoft because of all the competitors that are in this space, and they're late to the game. So I would imagine this will go into general availability fairly soon. I'm hoping it does, and it's not going anywhere. I think the big change will be improvements and also maybe a licensing change, which they're being pretty close-lipped about. So everybody, that's it for now. I'll see you next time, and stay safe out there.